A sonar operator on board the USS Ronald Reagan froze in mid-sentence in the Philippine Sea, east of Luzon. A trace that wasn't there showed on his screen. The proof burst through the waves a few seconds later. Inside the protective bubble of the carrier, a Chinese UN-class submarine emerged. It was more than a navigation error. It was a potentially catastrophic miscalculation. The crew realized that this was no routine operation, but rather a high-stakes game that could result in a significant global incident. At the worst conceivable moment, a UN-class diesel-electric boat with critically low batteries had surfaced. The USS Ronald Reagan, America's most valuable asset, is located in the most closely guarded area. It decided to breach the surface at this precise moment and place, ensnared in the lethal confluence of strategic miscalculation and technological failure. This was a direct challenge to the operational supremacy of the USS Ronald Reagan and its escort ships, not merely an isolated incident. The escorts quickly closed ranks and rearranged their formation. With their sonar equipment investigating the depths below, helicopters dove into the air. The carrier continued to sail steadily forward, keeping its speed and composure. Officers maintained their focus and accuracy by exchanging concise, controlled directives. The combat formations developed and the formation tightened, but everything remained astonishingly calm. The hitch is that the Chinese sub wasn't posing a threat to the United States during the time it was on the surface. It became more noticeable the farther it went into this dangerous move. Already prepared, radar systems started recording its profile. Acoustic traces were being collected by sonar equipment. Instead of panicking, the crew of the USS Ronald Reagan recognized that they had been presented with a wealth of intelligence, an unintended intelligence jackpot that was ready to be exploited. By surfacing near the Reagan, the Chinese submarine thought it had sent a message. Rather, it committed an awful mistake. At first, it was just a feeble murmur on the sonar screen, a faint pulse. It was a blip that might have gone unnoticed, blending almost in with the ocean's background hum. However, the USS Shoop, an early Berg-class destroyer, had a sonar operator who squinted his eyes and marked the trail. One quiet call-out, then another blip, then another. Its speed was just under 8 knots, which is typical of a diesel-electric submarine trying to stay hidden, and its depth was determined to be around 120 meters. The operator's brain took over. The radar made a slight modification, and the Combat Information Center received a quick alarm. The initial blip was more than simply a sonar trace as the data from different ships combined. It changed into an intricate, three-dimensional image of a potential danger. Now the Reagan attack group had a shadow, an unexpected visitor, and someone who shouldn't have been there. An extraordinary layer of protection surrounded the U.S. carrier strike group, which was more than just a large ship encircled by planes. Long-range missile defense was provided by the formation of Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and Ticonderoga-class cruisers. Below, the real hunters, the MH-60R Seahawks, were already taking off as E-2D Hawkeye planes circled overhead, covering hundreds of miles in a radar image. Night 614, a single helicopter, took off from a destroyer's deck. This was not your average helicopter. With its ANAQS-22 dipping sonar, the Romeo model was a specialized submarine hunter that could reach depths the conventional ship-mounted sonar was unable to. Already on high alert, the crew hurried to verify the sub's location. With its sonar penetrating farther into the sea, the Seahawk dove lower. This was a high-priority expedition rather than merely a routine check. It was like using a vacuum cleaner to gather every sub-signature within range thanks to the helicopter's ANALQ-210 electronic support suite and ANAPS-153 radar, which is intended to detect periscopes. The Reagan sonar technicians promptly verified what the Seahawk had suspected. The submarine was attempting to avoid visibility by hugging a thermal layer. But there was no denying the reality. The submarine's window to stay hidden was rapidly closing. Its batteries were running low, and it would eventually have to come to the surface. The cops on the Reagan's bridge did not recoil. They have witnessed this action previously. In order to demonstrate their ability, Chinese diesel submarines had a history of sneaking into international waters and following American carriers. The technicians focused on every cavitation pattern, the subtle number of propeller blades, and the RPM of the submarine's shaft as sonar data flooded the fleet's computers. It appeared to the untrained eye to be nothing more than a sound ripple in the water. However, the Navy saw it as a fingerprint, a distinctive way to identify the submarine's capabilities. It was a chance to identify and categorize the exact submarine that was in the area, which is a critical advantage in a high-stakes scenario. The Reagan strike force was unsurprised, and that was the unmistakable message. They weren't hurrying or scurrying to stop any unexpected danger. Rather, they were watching, listening, and getting ready for what was coming. The pattern of every submarine encounter is the same. The sub either stays concealed or comes to the surface, and that moment came faster than anyone could have predicted. The submarine broke the surface at 7:04 local time, its cover corroded by failed batteries. The sea was quiet, even deserted, one moment, and then a black, menacing sail surged through the waves, water tumbling down its tower. This was a desperate move, not a cunning one. Even contemporary diesel-electric submarines with air-independent propulsion, such as the Yuan class, are built for stealth, but they cannot remain underwater indefinitely. Long patrols sap their batteries and oxygen, leaving the skipper with little choice but to surface or lose propulsion. It's a harsh decision with no positive result, and this morning the decision was made more quickly than anyone had expected. With no other choice, the sub was compelled to surface in the most hazardous and exposed spot. For the Reagan's crew, it was just another training exercise, but for the submarine, it was the start of the end. The deck crew, which consists of sailors performing ordinary duties on the carrier's deck, was the first Americans to see the sub, not pilots or radar operators. When they looked up, they saw a Chinese submarine rise like a beast from its cage from the depths. It seemed unreal, nearly impossible to comprehend. The ensuing silence stood in sharp contrast to the possible danger. The radio protocol was activated. "Unidentified submarine, you are operating in the vicinity of a United States carrier strike group," said a cold, collected American voice over the open frequency. "Acknowledge and keep a safe distance." No weapons were activated, no missiles were armed, just a methodical, exact, and thoughtful process. The U.S. never escalates unless there is an immediate threat, according to Navy doctrine. The Reagan's crew followed it to the letter. In order to form a defensive wall between the ship and the surfaced submarine, the destroyer USS Shoup moved to starboard. In the meantime, the sub's opposite flank was covered by the USS Mustin, another destroyer of the R. Lee Burt class. This was not merely a display of strength. It was a well-thought-out placement to guarantee that no errors would be made. Every action was planned and covered. The helicopter, an MH-60R Seahawk, hovered overhead. As the sub attempted to maintain position at periscope depth, its sonar remained in the water, recording every motion and churn of the propellers. The skipper of the sub may have believed that coming to the surface so close to the Reagan would go unnoticed as a show of strength. Rather, it turned into a show. What started off as a modest show of presence soon turned into a treasure trove of intelligence. The Chinese submarine's surface appearance initially seemed to be a straightforward display of force. However, launching a torpedo is hardly the most dangerous moment for a submarine in contemporary naval combat. When it is compelled to breathe, that is. Intelligence was being relayed into the systems of the American fleet every minute the submarine remained on the surface. Electronic warfare systems, sonar, and radars took in every detail. The forced surfacing of the sub transformed a normal encounter into a crucial opportunity for the United States to gather data. Navy. A broadcasting tower of secrets was hidden behind what appeared to be a harmless shadow in the ocean. American receivers recorded the sub's pulse, including its frequency, breadth, and repetition rate, as soon as its radar went online. These signals could now be categorized by analysts like fingerprints. The following time the sub's radar was turned on, they could quickly identify it because it had been documented. In the meanwhile, the Seahawks' sonar collected instead of merely searching. Every sound produced by the cooling pumps, every vibration from the diesel engines, and every propeller churn was recorded, resulting in a distinct sonic character. The Navy would be able to easily follow the sub's movements because these signatures would be accessible for further encounters. The acoustic libraries of the Navy were designed for situations such as this. These distinctive noises, the buzz of the engines and the hum of the propellers, become a permanent inventory. These noises will be detected, examined, and immediately linked to the original source when a comparable submarine appears nearby in the future. The escort's electronic warfare equipment provided an additional intelligence layer. The ANSLQ-32 systems performed analysis in addition to listening. Every signal from the submarine's satellite communications, every communication burst, and even the tiniest modulation anomalies were recorded. For the Americans, this was an intelligence boon rather than merely a conflict. Additionally, this was not the first time it had occurred. A Chinese Song-class submarine revealed important intelligence when it surfaced close to the USS Kitty Hawk in 2006. Then, in 2015, the USS Ronald Reagan was tracked by a Chinese submarine, which once more leaked important information. These incidents weren't one-offs. Rather, they were a part of a larger trend in which Chinese submarines surfaced too near American ships. ostensibly to send a message, but in fact, giving the US Navy a chance to collect for free. The information obtained from these interactions was examined, saved, and used in further interactions. The cycle was repeated in 2025. The Reagan's crew viewed what the sub's skipper probably saw as a daring and assertive move as a useful training exercise. This real-world situation allowed them to increase their knowledge base without running the risk of conflict. Nobody was yelling or startled inside the Reagan's Combat Information Center. In naval warfare, you don't win by shouting louder, you win by knowing more, the operations officer remarked. At that point, the US Navy was far more informed than it was 15 minutes before. The Chinese submarine believed it was in the lead. It had, in fact, stepped right into a trap, one that needed only calm, unyielding discipline, no bait, no chase. Every ship in the strike group handled the surface submarine like a coiled snake for the next 10 minutes, keeping it under strict control despite its unpredictable and hazardous nature. The US Navy was ready because they understood that any abrupt action could result in catastrophe. In addition to revealing its position, the subsurface shadow had also highlighted its flaws and vulnerabilities. It was unpredictable even if it wasn't moving quickly or pointing weapons. Furthermore, unpredictability at sea is a surefire way to go wrong. The escorts repositioned themselves. The USS Mustin stayed to starboard, and the USS Shoup remained off the port bow of the sub. The two destroyers were prepared to stop any unexpected move. The weapons were tight, but they were armed in vertical launch cells. The Seahawk hovered idly overhead, but its sensors were fixed on the target. The Seahawk's crew would mark the precise bearing and drop torpedoes in a matter of seconds if the submarine tried a crash dive. The crew seemed focused but not tense. They had trained for precisely this. A single incorrect radio communication or a hastily pulled gun could have escalated this standoff into a global crisis. Both the Chinese and the Americans were aware of that. The radios maintained a steady, nearly sterile tone as a result. Unidentified submarine, maintain position, you are being monitored. The expected response was silence. It seemed like every second went on forever. The sailors on deck were tense, not because they were afraid of being attacked, but rather because they had a very small margin of error. Any of the following could have been interpreted as a threat: a small misstep, an abrupt rudder turn, or a misinterpreted signal light. Errors would also be immediately penalized with Aegis destroyers encircling them. The intelligence harvest was finished by the time the submarine started to move away from the carrier. What was left was a blatant example of how discipline overcomes drama. Quiet, methodical, and composed under duress, the US Navy had adhered to its playbook. The Reagan strike force did not rejoice when the submarine eventually sank beneath the waves once more. Physics eventually requires the boat to surface in order to replenish oxygen. The Chinese submarine crew were undoubtedly unprepared for the powerful detection systems they exposed themselves to each time. This issue has been brought to light previously and will continue to do so. The unsettling reality for Beijing is that intimidation strategies work better at home, but less well at sea. Silence can be more lethal than gunshots in contemporary naval warfare. The real advantage lies in the US Navy's capacity to gather, examine, and use this data. The Reagan Strike Squad knew that patience was the best tool. Thus, they didn't rush to intensify the conflict. Here's a serious question for you. Knowing the hazards, would you risk surfacing close to a US carrier as the captain of the Chinese submarine, watching your battery gauges dip? Or would you dive deeper and hope you weren't noticed? Let me know where you stand in the comments section below. If you want to take your support a step further, join the fleet. This is not a hypothetical. It's a reflection of decisions made in high-stakes, real-world scenarios where intelligence and discipline, not firepower, determine the balance of power